Mister, how do you operate this Twitter thing or this Instagram thing or whatever the heck? You're supposed to know all this stuff. Anyway, welcome back to the show.
Welcome back. 47 after the hour here on the fabulous, fantastic football Friday edition of Snowman in the Morning. Man, it feels good to say that. Speaking of football, if you're playing fantasy football this year, and I must admit I have been tempted, then you want to have some advice, don't you? Well, our fantasy football guru today breaks down the top 10 tight ends. And I already jokingly warned him, I better see George the Animal Kittle on that list. And he assured me, don't worry, Kittle's there. Let's see who his top 10 is, as Senra says. He's back, ready to talk some fantasy football with us. Kyle Senra himself, live and in person. Good morning, Kyle. How are you, my man?
Hey, Snowman. I'm doing great. Glad to be here. How are you doing?
I'm good. Glad to have you this season, and I promise y'all it's gonna be consistent because most of the turbulence that I've gone through health-wise the last 3 years is just about over with the returning of my knee scooter and my wheelchair. I'm ready to really, really get back to work and bring some great sports talk for you guys, which includes a little fantasy football. And today's subject, Senra's top 10, and we're going with fantasy tight ends. And there's a few on this list that I absolutely adore. Let's start at number 10. We go to Dallas and find Jake Ferguson from the Dallas Cowboys.
Yeah, so I think Jake Ferguson is really, I would say, the top 8 tight ends to me are a tier, and then 9, 10 is really probably the most 2 interesting spots of this to rank. And I picked basically 2 different players that are complete different archetypes. So you can make the argument for either. I think Jake Ferguson represents, when it comes to the rest of the tight ends outside the top 8, the best with the safest floor. We've seen not just with what he did last year, but the Cowboys tight end under Dak Prescott has just consistently got targets every year. They're always a top 2 or 3 target on the team. Mm-hmm. He only had 5 touchdowns last year, and Dak had 36, led the league, and Ferguson only had 5. So that's maybe the one concerning thing why he's not in that group of top 8. I don't know if there's enough touchdown upside. He's a safe floor, though, will consistently catch passes every week. So one of the safer tight ends you could probably draft. And I think if you're going to go outside the top 8, you want just, especially, in full PPR leagues or even leagues with tight end premium where tight ends get extra points per reception. Yep. He's probably the guy you prioritize because we just know that he's going to get the volume. I guess the one fear is, does Luke Schoonmaker overtake his role? But the Cowboys have also shown that the guy that's productive, they'll just go back to him the next year. Like, okay, you've proved it, you've earned it. The other guy's really got to do something special to take the job away. So even though they drafted Schoonmaker, very athletic guy, I really liked him. I was drafting him in dynasty leagues last year. I think I was saying to even take him ahead of Michael Mayer because I not such a believer in Michael Mayer, I guess. Mm-hmm. But even in spite of that, I don't think Schoonmaker is going to overtake Ferguson based on what Ferguson did last year. So I think he at least repeats what he did. Should finish as a top 12 tight end, finish in that tight end 1 range. But I think while he's safer than a lot of the guys after him, he also doesn't have a lot of the upside of basically everyone ahead of him.
Yeah. Oh, man, Jake Ferguson, he needs some more targets. He does in that Cowboy offense because they don't have a running game. They don't have a consistent running game. So, they're going to be throwing the ball 50 times a game. Cole Johnson was with me earlier in the show, and that's exactly what he described. And that's one of the positions he hinted at. At number 9,
we got a wide receiver 3. Oh, sorry. Right. They don't have a wide receiver 3 either. Because
that's the crazy part. They don't have a wide receiver 3. They just go 1, 2. And they're going to depend on
Jalen Tolbert figures it out.
Right.
Devontae Turpin becomes more than what he is. Yeah.
Right. Because we haven't seen Kevontae Turpin do or repeat what he did when he first got to the Cowboys. He hasn't repeated his value since he got there, so they've laid off the use of him.
I think they want him as a returner mostly. So yeah. They don't even really view him as a wide receiver. That's his position on the team, obviously, but they don't view him on their wide receiver depth chart as an integral part.
Right. Let's go to number 9. We go to Vegas, and this is going to be my other favorite tight end. This fellow, Brock Bowers, rookie out of the University of Georgia. And I'm just going to let Kyle have the floor on this one.
Well, yeah. So talk about not liking Michael Mayer. So, the initial instinct when Bowers was drafted by the Raiders, my thought was it's not a great spot, but because of the quarterback play, not because, oh, there's already a tight end there that's going to block him. I think Bowers is already going to come in and be ahead of Michael Mayer because Michael Mayer didn't really impress that much last year.
Right.
And I think Bowers comes in with a much more impressive athletic profile. So especially for fantasy purposes, a pass catcher, I think Bowers is the guy to have. But I would say he's the hardest guy to rank on this list. I mean, he's the only rookie we'll talk about. Where do you put the rookies? And actually, one of my process for this year with tight end and receiver, because I'm in the Fantasy Pros accuracy contest, and I've ranked well in weekly, especially weekly at tight ends, but season long pre-draft rankings for tight ends, I've not been so great at. Same with wide receivers. So I took a new process this year. I had my target share projections, my touchdown projections, and I essentially combined them to get a new number. I just ranked the wide receivers by that number, and the same with the tight ends. Based on that, on the projection number, Bowers really should be like tight end 14. Kind of, I think it's if you throw in TJ Hawks as well with the injuries, but who knows?
Right.
If you throw him in there, I think it's after the top 8, there's another tier, starting with Ferguson down to tight end 13. And then Bowers would come in after that. But I also know that rookie projections are so tough. And I know that with Bowers, he's got this tremendous upside.
Yes.
Love for George Kittle already. Every time an athletic tight end comes out, we're chasing the George Kittle hype because we've seen what that can do on a weekly basis. George Kittle is probably the best at winning you weeks. He can, I'll give this example. I don't think George Kittle's ever had a 4 touchdown game, but he certainly has had 3 touchdown games. And when he does that, it's like 150 yards in 3 touchdowns.
Yes.
He's getting like wide receiver numbers. I remember a game, it was either last year or a couple years ago. Travis Kelce had 4 touchdowns for 29 yards.
29 yards.
Kelce is a high volume tight end everywhere, especially in the red zone, which is why the touchdowns are great. But with Kittle, he's the tight end that can score from anywhere. Unlike a lot of tight ends can do. Like there's most wide receivers can't even do that. But like we see a lot more like really fast elite receivers that just take a screen pass, and if it's blocked properly and the defense isn't ready, he's gone in the end zone, even if from the team's own 10-yard line. So we've seen that with several wide receivers, but there's really only like 2 tight ends that come to mind in the modern day that I can think of. Kittle and Jonnu Smith. And spoiler alert, we're not going to be talking about Jonnu Smith on the rankings. I like him, but not the target earner. Brock Bowers, it seems like he comes in with that potential. And so while going by my projections, he should be outside the top 10. I think if I look at that Ferguson tier, like the guys, the safe floor of Ferguson, at this point of the draft, I think I'd rather shoot for the upside. And I think Bowers has higher upside than him, than David Njoku, than Dallas Goedert, than Pat Freiermuth, guys that I, in the projections, have ahead of him. So I'm willing to maybe have the rookies, and Bowers too, but like all the rookies, even at wide receiver, higher than where I have them in the projections. I'm willing to kind of admit that I'm probably wrong about the projections, knowing it's so tough to have with rookies.
Yeah.
And if I'm going based on like what I'm looking at ADP and my projections, I'm much lower than consensus on all the rookies. So even raising them a little bit, I'm still like, I think Bowers is probably going earlier than tight end 9. So even my ranking is probably not one that means I'm going to have a lot of him. I still think, again, I don't think he hasn't done anything yet. So he hasn't earned the right to be in that like top 8 tier, which I think is pretty locked in. We've got a lot of really safe guys in terms of safety that we've seen it over and over again, and have in some cases really high upside. So Bowers, until further notice, this is as high as I can put him.
Number 8, we go to the NFC West from the AFC West, and we find Trey McBride from the Arizona Cardinals. A bit of a wild card last year. Late in the season, you saw what he can do when he gets the targets. He caught 8 against San Francisco and Arizona in Week 15. But he's picking up the targets now, and now with a healthy Kyler Murray, he's going to get even more targets and going to be dependent on even more in that Arizona offense. Yeah,
and I think target-wise, Marvin Harrison coming there doesn't scare me because he had to deal with Marquise Brown. And really, the barrier for Trey McBride was just getting on the field. Zach Ertz was there for so long, at least in terms of since McBride had been drafted. Like even his rookie season, he did nothing most of the year. Ertz got hurt late in the year. He comes back. McBride comes out and in like 2 or 3 games gets like 15 targets or something.
Yeah.
You had a monster game and it was like week 18. So for fantasy football purposes, most of the leagues are over, like championships are done. So So it didn't matter. So a lot of people didn't see it. So last year, he was you know look at his season long numbers, they look bad. But you look at that 2 game sample size without Ertz, it was like, okay, that's intriguing. So it shouldn't have necessarily been a surprise that once they moved on from Ertz early last year,
Mm-hmm.
that McBride just exploded and got the targets. So I think that's going to remain
Yeah.
because I mean they drafted another tight end this year, but I think Tip Ryman. But he seems like raw athletic, like not quite ready for the NFL game to immediately come out and take a role in the offense as a rookie. So I feel pretty safe with McBride is going to get the targets. To me, the issue why he's at 8, I think, like McBride, like Brower, I was saying, Snowman, I think this is a ranking that's lower. Like I'm seeing McBride go as a top 3, top 4 tight end in drafts.
Mm-hmm.
That's a little too early for me. And the one concern is the touchdowns.
Yep.
The Cardinals, they're very proficient with the rushing touchdowns, especially. They're the red zone.
Mm-hmm.
They're run heavy, whether it's Kyler Murray himself or what it has been the last couple of years, James Conner.
Well, James
Even
Conner.
when Kenyon Drake was there, he had like career years because he was getting touchdowns and just getting a lot of volume in that regard.
Yeah.
So I think, Kyler, have him for 25 touchdowns projected.
Mm-hmm.
But I think I've only got McBride for 4. And if I look at my rankings ahead of him, other than the guy that's immediately next to him, everyone else I have projected for more touchdowns. So I think the targets are fine. He'll be safe. And that's why I think, again, to me, it's a clear top 8. Like these truly are the tight ends I want to target.
Mm-hmm.
There's the next tier of maybe, down to tight end 12, 13 that, okay, if I have to go late and one of them's there, I like it. But then once you get past that, you might as well just wait till the last round.
Right.
My tight end strategy tends to be, if I'm, especially for those guys I'm taking super late, if I'm not happy week 1, I'm cutting them and moving on. Like I'm chasing the targets almost immediately from the get-go.
Yeah.
And so the mid-round tight ends scare me because it feels like you're making too much investment to just cut them after week 1.
Mm-hmm.
Yet they might not be different, and there might be someone out there on the waiver wire better than who you have. And I think McBride is maybe the last guy that I'm super sure about that. Yeah,
right.
These are the 8 guys I really absolutely want to build my team around. And if I don't, as much as the next tier like Ferguson, I'm okay with it. I still feel like they might all still be overpriced.
Yeah.
I think McBride might be overpriced, but not because he doesn't belong in this tier, just because I really like the next few guys with touchdown upside.
Speaking of touchdowns, let's go to number 7, and we find Evan Ingram from the Jacksonville Jaguars.
A guy that, touchdowns that have been hard to come by for him, really. I mean, he's very similar to McBride. And I've looked it up and I've heard it referenced on podcasts too. His best touchdown season is still his rookie year. 2017, I believe.
17.
The year Beckham first had a major injury. That was, I think, he tore his ACL like week 4. And then Sterling Shepard was also on the team. He also got hurt a lot that year. So Ingram had this like massive target season, and he had the touchdowns, and he had never really even replicated the targets, let alone the touchdowns.
Right.
Last year, he finally got that massive target season with Christian Kirk getting hurt. But still just 4 touchdowns, right? So like McBride, I think with Ingram, we've seen maybe a bit more of a track record of multiple seasons, multiple quarterbacks giving him 100 targets. Whereas, McBride, we just really have that 2-game sample size a couple years ago, and then a fairly big sample size of most of last year. But Ingram's kind of done it more and more. So I've got him just a little higher in the target share projection. I think I've got them both for 4 touchdowns. So in actuality, McBride's probably going ahead of Ingram.
Yeah.
Which means Ingram might be a good value. Like he might be even going behind Bowers in some cases. Like he might be that tight end 8, 9 in drafts where that's the last guy you really feel safe about when you look at drafts.
Yeah.
So he might be someone that managers, if they're not wanting to spend early, but still want someone that they can feel they can trust week in, week out. They don't want to have to roster multiple tight ends. I think Ingram, like in my rankings, McBride is the last guy, but I think the way drafts go, Ingram really ends up being that last guy available.
Arku joins us, and he says when Kyler Murray came back, McBride shined. Yeah, he certainly did, and we talked about that and the targets that he's going to get with a healthy Kyler Murray. Down to number 6 we go, and we find Kyle Pitts from the Atlanta Falcons.
Yeah, and I know both Pitts and Drake London seem to be being hyped because they'll be getting Kirk Cousins. And I've definitely raised both in where I would have had them ranked beforehand. But yeah, Pitts does seem like he could truly be the beneficiary because like both Pitts and London have gotten tons of targets, but it's really been quarterback quality that just hasn't done it for them. There was Pitt's rookie season, he was actually pretty great. He had 1,000 yards. I think he had one touchdown though. And so the last couple years, he's gotten better with the touchdowns, but just isn't catching as many passes. Still getting targets, but sometimes it's a lot of just, especially last couple years. Well, last couple years, you had a Mariota Desmond Ridder mix, and then you mostly had Desmond Ridder last year with Heineke sprinkled in.
Right.
Like Heineke's, if it was Heineke that all season last year, maybe Pitts does do better. But I think, I think we talked about that before. Like, I think you agree with me too. If Heineke started the whole year, the Falcons might have been in the playoffs because that might have given that 2 extra wins they needed to overtake the Buccaneers. But Cousins is a step even further, coming off the torn Achilles, so we don't know for sure if he's going to be the same quality quarterback he's been. But if he gets even close to that, it's higher than league average quarterback play, and that's even league average quarterback play would be a blessing for Pitts. But I think Cousins allows him to take the next step. I'm still hesitant because it feels like since Pitts has come into the league, we're chasing the next athletic tight end. Like people were drafting him that first year as if he's going to be tight end 1 from now until he retires. That's especially in dynasty leagues or that redraft leagues. We're still pretty hyped in that rookie year, but dynasty leagues, man, the hype was through the roof. And I think people are again chasing the George Kittle archetype. We want Pitts to be this uber athletic guy that can just score from everywhere. The Falcons facilitated that situation last year, and it was John Smith doing those things, taking 3 passes to the house. And so I'm still hesitant to think Pitts is that, which is why this is about as high as I'm willing to rank him, knowing who is in the top 5. And again, probably as much as we can say Pitts has good, high weekly ceiling, there's one guy I think still is the king among tight ends in terms of weekly ceiling.
Well, we've mentioned this next one already and put the word archetype behind him. One of the damn best in the business. Y'all know who it is. At the number 5 slot, George the Animal Kittle from the San Francisco 49ers.
Yeah, and part of this ranking is the timing of it. I mean, if we find out Brandon Ayuk's gone, I'm probably raising George Kittle in the target share rankings. That probably only raises him 1 spot because I'm pretty locked in on who the top 3 are in terms of tight end. And I got 4 and 5 in kind of a tier of their own, and Kittle being here because again, more upside than anyone below him. Now, I think you can argue there might be some guys that have safer weekly floors than Kittle. Certainly, Evan Ingram with all the targets he's getting. With our Kusa and what we've talked about too, McBride and the targets he's getting, he's probably safer on a weekly basis than Kittle is. You could even argue Jake Ferguson might be too. But none of them have the weekly upside of Kittle to just get these massive yardage games. The yards after the catch especially is incredibly impressive. On almost any play, he can take it to the house. And so if ever he's like fairly wide open, even if it's not like a super deep pass, it could still mean he's taking it all the way. So and with those massive yards and massive touchdown games come these like massive spike weeks where tight end over 1 on the week is like attainable, and when he does it, he's doing it probably a higher difference than everyone else. So in this tier, you got a guy with absolute high ceiling, but man, the floor for Kittle, sometimes they can get into games where he's blocking most of the time and McCaffrey's running so well that they barely need to pass, which back to the top 10 quarterbacks. I know you were a little disappointed Purdy wasn't in there. Timing wise though, if we were to have done this quarterback episode now that Herbert and is dealing with this injury, I probably do have Purdy sneaking in there and making it to 10, to be fair. So we were a little early on the quarterback episode. We'll see. We can revise that to say, other than the wide receivers, we've talked about a 49ers player every episode.
And that's great that that we did. I'm happy we're doing these episodes, and I'm spreading them all over the place to get people ready for fantasy football. I kid around with you a lot when it comes to Purdy and McCaffrey and everybody on the Niners. On a side note, Brandon Ayuk's not getting traded because he said last night he's willing to accept $28 million on a long-term deal. So now John Lynch and company are putting their heads together to see if they can get him that 28, because remember, Brock Purdy's payday is coming. They had to take care of Nick Bosa, had to take care of Deebo Samuel. Okay, and they just signed.
And I think back to those negotiations, how those got signed around this time of year in August, when we're getting into the preseason. So I've ranked them as if Ayuk is staying, which again is why Kittle, like his target share is, I've got him at 19.6, which is the lowest among all these top 8. But
Right.
again, I've got him higher than Pitts, Ingram, McBride. I just think he has more upside than them. So even if the
Mhm.
targets might not be as consistent, I still think this is. Do you think this is the right spot for Kittle?
It
Just
is.
personally. Okay.
It is, especially, and you talked about it the last 2 weeks with the way this 49er offense is and how stacked it is. McCaffrey, Debo, George Kittle, in some cases, Kyle Juszczyk, Brandon Ayuk, Jawan Jennings, who's basically their third down receiver, and now they got a fabulous rookie out of Georgia and Ricky Pearsall. He's going to see the field and get some catches, and
The other
it's
rookie,
just the
Jacob Cowing,
way.
too. I mean, he's
Yep.
not a nobody either.
Exactly. And it's just how this 49er team is so stacked up. You've mentioned it every time that we talk. The rankings may be low in some cases for San Francisco, but you got to think of A, how their offense is built, B, who's calling the plays, which of course is Kyle Shanahan, and C, how many targets the 49ers have for Purdy to throw to and to use on offense, and how special they all are.
And not to make this a huge 49ers episode, but not to spoil the running back episode, but yes, I ranked Christian McCaffrey at RB1. Do
Yep.
you think this calf injury, you seem to agree with me for sure on that, would you change that now with this calf injury for McCaffrey?
Nah.
See, me neither.
Nope.
My thought is, instead of taking him 101, I might default to Tyreek Hill, especially in full PPR for sure, but even in a half PPR league, I might just say, give me that who I think is the wide receiver one. That's how I've predicted it. But it's still, even with this calf injury in single quarterback leagues, it's hard to envision myself letting McCaffrey fall beyond the 102.
Yeah, can't do it. Let's go to Buffalo for number 4, and they're going to need this guy to really step up with the losses they had in the offseason, Dalton Kincaid.
And the reason I have Kincaid and Kittle in the same tier is I think they're the extreme ends of both archetypes, the ceiling and floor, what we're chasing. We've talked numerous times. I'll fill up a whole room to get to the ceiling to talk about how Kittle has the highest weekly ceiling of any tight end. But the way all the moves the Bills have made and anything they've said publicly, this offense is going to revolve around Dalton Kincaid as the alpha in the passing.
It is.
They're going to turn it to what the Chiefs do with Travis Kelce.
Right.
And that gives, I think, Kincaid just incredible, safe, high floor, maybe as high a floor as the guys in the top 3. I think the one thing that I keep him outside the top 3 for is the touchdown upside, just because as much as he's going to be like a main focal point target between the 20s, we know when they get to the red zone, the most threatening weapon is Josh Allen on the ground himself. And so I think Josh Allen vultures enough touchdowns away from. You don't usually hear the quarterback. You usually hear of like a Juszczyk coming in, and like when Juszczyk scores, every fantasy manager is upset because there's at least 5 different people with players in the line. Unless Purdy's passing him the ball, the Purdy manager is upset. Like McCaffrey managers, man, he just got like 8 carries on that drive, and you get the most important carry, you give it to Juszczyk, and then all the receivers were like, "Damn, why couldn't they throw there?"
Yes.
So. But Allen himself can vulture it away, which was what makes him so valuable. But it still gives me pause to put Kincaid up in the top tier.
Yeah.
So, but I think I would take the shot on him ahead of Kittle because I think his floor is safe enough that I'll take that weekly just reception production from the tight end, and I can try and find upside shots at other pieces. When it gets to the guys below Kittle, obviously I don't know that their floor is necessarily what Kincaid is. So that's when. Okay, then I'll flip to take the upside shot at Kittle.
Nightfall Drop joins us with a lot of 49er comments. Nightfall, I want you to stand by because after this, I'm going to give my thoughts on Brandon Ayuk and the 49er situation in a Snowman's Take. So stand by because I got some things to talk about with Brandon Ayuk with a 2-foot smile on my face. To number 3 we go, and we go to Baltimore, and we find the great Mark Andrews.
Yeah, we talk about safe, secure targets. I mean, Andrews might lead the team in targets. I think it could be Zay Flowers, though, and I think I actually have it projected that way, but but both of them monopolizing most of the targets. It's I think we referenced that on the wide receiver episode with Puka Nacua and Cooper Kupp. Like, they're going to get over half of Matt Stafford's targets.
Right.
It's not quite half. It's just under 50%. I think it's like 47, 48%, I think I have for Flowers and Andrews together. But super safe. And even in spite of Flowers being projected with more targets, I still have Andrews with the higher touchdown projection. So that's an interesting one because they are going into similar spots in drafts. And who do you take the shot on? Do you have enough depth at wide receiver up to that point? That's where you flip to a tight end. Or are you in that range still thinking, okay, I'm taking several wide receivers and I can get I'll target Kincaid Kittle a little later. So it's a really interesting dilemma that I don't think there's a right or wrong answer to it.
Mhm.
It might come down to league settings in the full PPR leagues. Maybe you just prefer to get deeper at wide receiver in the half PPR. Man, Andrew's touchdown upside. That's where I give me that advantage at tight end right away. But I do
Right.
think this is the top tier. And one thing that does all the three guys in the top tier, I guess maybe this spoils, but not really, because at this point you should probably know who they are.
Mhm.
I don't think there's any surprises for one or two. Maybe the
Yeah.
order based on the way I've seen drafts go. But the one thing
Mhm.
that Andrews has is he has finished as the tight end one overall.
Mhm.
And there's only 3 players left in the league that have done that, because the guys before Kelsey's big run started, it was Gronk, who's retired. Jimmy
Yes.
Graham, I believe
Yep.
he's also retired. And
He
so,
has.
like Antonio Gates, like Tony
Oh,
Gonzalez, all
man.
these guys that
Antonio Gates. Wow.
be the tight end one at any point for most of a generation between, like, that probably
Yep.
lasted 15 years between when Tony Gonzalez started and when Gronk ended. And so you got
Mhm.
all 4 of those guys just taking turns at who was the tight end one. And then you've had Kelsey come along and just, no, it's me every year. There was a season, I think it was 2019. Kittle missed some
Yep.
games, but on a points per
Yeah.
game basis matched Kelsey.
Yes,
But
he did.
overall, Kelsey still finished as the tight end one.
Mhm.
Uh, we haven't seen Kittle do that since, like match Kelsey, even if it's not like, okay, he gets hurt some games and that's fine. You don't count it against it. But even on a points per game basis, he still hasn't done that. And
Mhm.
so, as much as it's like you could credit Kittle with that too, but to me, the top 3 all have in their range of outcomes finishing as the tight end one overall, because they're the only 3 we've seen do it that are around still.
Gotta love it. Y'all gotta love this y'all gotta love this discussion. Kyle's gonna be with us each and every week. 2 spots left, and Arku said in the chat, Sam Laporta better be in the top 10. Here's your answer, Arku. He's at number
Oh
2.
yeah, yeah, no doubt about it. I mean, he finished as the tight end one last year. I mean, one thing we hear about tight ends is, oh yeah, you have to be patient with rookie tight ends. Well, he just blew that narrative out the water and finished as the tight end one overall. Now
Mhm.
on a points per game basis, I think Kelsey and Hawkinson still finished ahead of him.
Yeah.
But either way, like we get that range of outcomes. Laporta doesn't have an injury history, so if you want to take a shot on a guy that you think will be healthy through the whole year, then you're banking on
Yeah.
who would be that healthiest guy. You'd probably go with
Yeah.
the 2 rookies from last year in terms of Laporta and Kincaid. Now, I don't hold the injuries against Andrews, which is why I've got him at 3. I know that he suffered a broken leg last year. He even came back to play in the playoffs. Didn't look great, but I think now that enough time will have passed, like I haven't heard anything of him being limited at training camp. Like as far as I'm concerned, he's over that injury, and it's now back to Andrews being healthy. But
Mhm.
yeah, what we saw from Laporta last year, I don't think it's a fluke. I think
No.
he got into the double
Oh no.
digit touchdowns. I'm projecting him just a little lower than that. I think
Mhm.
he produced really well, so it wasn't a massive overproduction, but typically, like based on his yards, he overproduced in terms of touchdowns by a couple scores.
Mhm.
I've got him projected for 8 touchdowns this year. So uh, safe target share. Unlike Andrews, though, and the guy that I think we have at number 1, I don't think he's going to lead his team in targets, but it'll be so much the volume concentration on the top 2, and that's really what we're
Yeah.
looking for. Really, with
Yeah.
all of the top 4 guys. I mean,
Mhm.
Kincaid, I think we're pretty confident he's going to be number 1, but even if he's not, he'll be close enough as a number 2. Andrews, the same thing. He'll either be 1 or 2. Laporte is
Mhm.
probably going to be 2, but it's going to be close enough to Amon-Ra, or certainly far enough ahead of everyone else that it's like those are the archetypes you really chase, and Laporta showed that touchdown upside almost immediately. The truth is, we
Absolutely.
can see him still continue to improve.
Yep.
But
Yep.
just because he did it as a rook, I mean, there is a chance this last year was Laporta's best season of his career. We
Mhm.
saw it with Evan Ingram, right? So
Oh yeah.
that is built in. But I'm willing to take the shot on what we saw from Laporta was real last year, and
Mhm.
I mean, I could certainly get the argument of taking him as the tight end 1. Now, I've taken who I have as the tight end 1 in enough drafts that now, presented with the opportunity as we get later into draft season, I
Right.
might fall into just taking Laporte as the first guy just to get some exposure to him. That's
Mhm.
how close I have it between really all of the top 3, but certainly the top 2.
Yeah. Well, we've reached number 1, and there is no surprise, there is no secret, and there's no hiding this. You know who it is. It's Travis Kelce from the world champion Kansas City Chiefs.
And Nightfall Drop just made a good comment about, as long as Goff doesn't drop off.
Yes.
And I think that might be the one last factor of why I have Kelsey ahead of Laporta. Still higher touchdown upside because the quarterback has higher passing touchdown upside.
Yes.
Tied to the best quarterback in the league. I go back to the quarterback rank episodes. I have Mahomes at 1, so that the natural stack is, and it's a lot cheaper to do that this year. If you want to go into your drafts and take both Kelsey and Mahomes, you had to do that last year. You might have had to do that with your first 2 picks.
Right.
This year, you might be able to make a first round pick and then go Kelsey in the second, Mahomes in the third. Especially if you're drafting really early, you could start off, but conceivably with like Tyreek Hill, Kelsey, Mahomes as your first 3 picks. That gives so much upside, especially touchdown upside. I think Kelsey will lead the Chiefs in targets. Although I got to say, this year might be the first year where it really comes into question because of Marquise Brown. He's a guy that his career, he's earned targets. I mean, we talked about Mark Andrews. There was at least one season where they were together where Marquise Brown had more targets than Mark Andrews. So Brown has shown that capacity to, even if you rely on your tight end, I will be such an intriguing downfield target that I can draw that away. So, but it's also, I think there's enough fear, which is why Kelsey's dropping to the second round now, like late second, as opposed to a late. I think last year people were even debating, like, do you take him in the mid first, like a 105, and you might have dropped essentially like a full round plus this year. So this seems still like a great time to get value on Kelsey. Now, what we saw last year might be the drop off. The scary thing was it kind of came out of nowhere. He was healthy all through training camp. So, this time of year you can have confidence drafting him. And then 2 weeks before the season kicked off, like their last practice before the season, he hyperextends his knee, misses that first week, and then was never quite the same until really the playoffs. The playoffs seemed to be where he was at his best. That didn't help fantasy managers at all. The fantasy football season. So that's the one fear, and I the one reason I can understand why people go Laporta ahead of Kelsey. So I think it is really close. But if I've got one draft to do, I'm taking Kelsey ahead of him. But again, now that I've taken Kelsey in a couple spots, now I might flip to actually going Laporta just to diversify a little bit. And I want in on the Laporta action too. It seems really fun, like a fun ride last year.
Right. Oh, this is going to be a fun ride this year, folks. Kyle Senra joining us to talk some fantasy football. His top 10 tight ends have been revealed. Who are yours? Make your comments in the chat below and keep this conversation going. Kyle, I love you, brother, so much. Thanks for joining me. I appreciate it. We'll do it again next week.
Thank you, Snowman.
I still got a lot to do here on this Friday edition of Snowman in the Morning. Coming up next, going to take 5 minutes off sports and then couple it with a Snowman's take on one Brandon Ayuk. Oh, boy. And I got a lot to say about Brandon Ayuk. Good, bad, and ugly. And believe me, it could be all three. Stand by, folks. Snowman in the Morning on the Fabulous Fantastic Football Friday edition continues on after this.
This is Snowman in the Morning.